Back in 1942, Europe was groaning under the iron boots of Nazi Germany. With a blitzkrieg strategy, lightning war, Hitler and what was then the most powerful military force in the world brought death and terror to the old continent. But his ambitions did not stop there. Hitler sought to break the heart of the Soviet Union, to seize Russia's vast lands and limitless resources. And so, Operation Stalingrad was born, a reckless gamble, launched with the hope of destroying the enemy in a single decisive blow. That spring, more than 1.7 million German troops, along with thousands of tanks, aircraft, and artillery units, swept across the Russian steppe like a storm of steel. Opposing them stood 1.6 million Red Army soldiers, carrying their hearts the oath, not one step back. Stalingrad, the city that bore Stalin's name, perched on the banks of the Volga River, became the focus of the entire world. Here, amid smoke, frost, and rubble, unfolded the most brutal confrontation in human history, where two iron wills collided in a battle with no escape. And it was here at Stalingrad that the Nazi Empire began to crumble, marking a bloody turning point in the Second World War. Stalingrad was more than just a city by the Volga. For Hitler, it was a key to unlocking victory on the Eastern Front. To capture would mean severing Soviet supply lines, dominating the Northeast, securing the German eastern flank, and posing a direct threat to the Caucasus, a region whose vital oil fields were the lifeblood of Stalin's war machine. But beyond all that, Stalingrad carried Stalin's name. If the city fell, it would strike a psychological blow to the Soviet people, a triumph not only military, but political. Recognizing its existential importance, the Soviet High Command issued a direct order. Stalingrad must be held at all costs. Over 200,000 soldiers and a vast array of modern military equipment were sent to the city, preparing for a battle of unprecedented scale. Meanwhile, Hitler launched Operation Blau, a sweeping campaign aimed at capturing the southwestern USSR and the oil-rich Caucasus. He declared, "If we don't take Maykop and Grozny, we will lose this war." To realize this goal, Hitler deployed Army Groups 6 and 17 and Panzer Armies 1 and 4, coordinated with his Hungarian and Italian allies to form a colossal strike force pushing toward the Volga. However, just as momentum seemed to favor the Germans, Hitler made a fatal error. He split Army Group South into two separate thrusts, drastically weakening his forces. Group A was ordered to push into the Caucasus, while Group B was tasked with taking Stalingrad. This division violated the core principle of concentrated strength, a strategy that had once fueled Germany's lightning victories. Veteran generals voiced their concern, but Hitler dismissed them. He underestimated the Red Army's resilience and placed too much faith in another summer victory. Meanwhile, Soviet forces fought tenaciously in Sevastopol, delaying the Germans and their Romanian allies. Time passed, and the brutal Russian winter loomed on the horizon. And from that moment on, the Stalingrad gamble took a new turn, where Hitler's ambition, arrogance, and strategic miscalculations would lead to one of the most devastating defeats in the history of warfare. After months of preparation, on June 28, 1942, the first shots were fired, marking the start of the Battle of Stalingrad. From the south, German army groups surged forward like a steel hurricane, backed by thousands of tanks, artillery pieces, and aircraft. On the open plains, the German Wehrmacht quickly seized the upper hand. But the Soviet Red Army refused to engage in open battle. Instead, they executed a strategic withdrawal eastward, luring the enemy into dense forests and difficult terrain, where German tanks and artillery lost their advantage and were forced into brutal close-quarters combat, the Russian soldiers' specialty. Despite establishing multiple defensive lines, the Red Army was repeatedly pierced by Germany's ruthless flanking maneuvers. In just 2 weeks, 2 Soviet army groups were annihilated at Kharkov and Milerovo. To the north, German forces and their Hungarian, Italian, and Romanian allies smashed through Soviet positions along the Don River, opening the road to the Volga. By late July, German troops were less than 40 kilometers from Stalingrad. Hitler believed victory was within reach. He ordered Panzer Army 4 to link up with other advancing units, forming a massive pincer movement to encircle the city. However, narrow supply routes and logistical chaos caused severe delays, prompting Hitler, in a fit of rage, to reverse the maneuver, a critical error that broke the momentum of the German advance. Meanwhile, in the Caucasus front, Army Group A was bogged down by rugged terrain and the Red Army's guerrilla tactics. The prolonged battles drained German forces, both in numbers and morale. But on the Don River, the German blitz continued to surge. In just a few days, over 1 million troops, 1,200 tanks, 17,000 artillery pieces, and 1,600 aircraft converged from the northwest and south towards Stalingrad, forming a massive encirclement. Realizing the imminent threat, Soviet High Command urgently reinforced the city's defenses. Army Groups 62, 63, and 64, alongside the elite First Guards Army and hundreds of T-34 tanks, were rushed to Stalingrad. The city became a battlefield of willpower, where both sides prepared for a decisive life-or-death struggle. To Hitler, capturing the city bearing Stalin's name would shatter the Soviet Union, but Stalin issued the exact opposite command: not a step back. Before the skies were filled with fire and steel, the Soviets evacuated all factories, food supplies, and civilians across the Volga, though left in ruins. The city's war industry continued to build T-34 tanks right in the heart of the battlefield. Starting in late July, the Luftwaffe unleashed relentless bombing raids on the Volga River, the city's sole supply lifeline. Within days, over 30 Soviet transport vessels were sunk and dozens more heavily damaged. The skies above the Volga glowed red. The waters burned with oil and drifted with bodies. Stalingrad had become hell on earth. The battle began with massive aerial assault by Luftwaffe, commanded by General Wolfram von Richthofen, Germany's steel beast in the sky. In just hours, over 1,000 tons of bombs rained down on Stalingrad, turning the city on the Volga into a sea of fire and rubble. Amid the devastation, factory workers continued to assemble tanks in the ruins, then picked up rifles to fight alongside the Red Army. But the sheer power of the Luftwaffe gave German troops quick dominance, allowing them to push deep into the city. German infantry and the 369 Croatian Reinforcement Division flooded into the ruins, slaughtering those who remained. In the face of this catastrophe, Stalin ordered a full-scale mobilization. Red Army units from across the Soviet Union were dispatched to the Volga front, though many were halted in Siberia after bridges and ferries were destroyed by German air raids. The surviving soldiers had to pull their boats across the river with ropes, all while German bombs rained down around them. On August 23, 1942, the Luftwaffe launched the largest bombing campaign in the history of the Eastern Front. Thousands of civilians perished. 90% of residential areas were destroyed. Stalingrad became a massive pile of ash and ruins. Within that week alone, the Red Army lost 201 aircraft, while the Luftwaffe maintained absolute air superiority. Yet in the midst of this inferno, Stalin remained cold and calculating. He ordered the relocation of all factories and production lines to the Soviet rear, allowing the USSR to produce 15,800 aircraft in the second half of 1942 alone, a critical foundation for future counteroffensives. In the most brutal early days of the battle, Stalingrad's defense was entrusted to Anti-Aircraft Regiment 1077, a unit desperately short of supplies and support. Even so, they fought to the last soldier, halting an entire column of German tanks. As German forces advanced, they were stunned to discover that most of the fighters in Regiment 1077 were young women in their early 20s, factory workers who had never seen battle. They fell amid the smoke and flames, sacrificing their lives to protect their homeland. Inside the city, tanks were assembled right on the factory floors. Many rolled into battle without even being painted. Mechanics, factory workers, university students, all took up arms. By late August, German Army Group B had reached the banks of the Volga River, slicing Stalingrad into isolated sectors. The Red Army had to risk everything. sending reinforcements one by one across the river under a hail of artillery and gunfire. Counteroffensives on September 5th and 18th ended in disaster, as the Luftwaffe pounded Soviet formations with bombs and shells. Dozens of tanks were incinerated, hundreds of planes shot down, and the 62nd and 64th Armies were forced to retreat deeper into the city, entrenching themselves within the ruins. By now, Stalingrad was no longer a city. It had become a maze of rubble and fire. German troops were held at the outskirts, while the Red Army clung to buildings, turning each into a makeshift fortress. Urban guerrilla warfare was born. Every house a battlefield, every floor a front line. To the north and northwest, the Stalingrad front was formed to halt the advance of Germany's Sixth Army. Blood dyed the Don River red. Neither side took prisoners. Hitler ordered the capture of the city bearing Stalin's name at all costs, even as the Russian winter approached. The Germans launched a furious assault, while the Red Army carved bloody supply paths across the Volga for its defenders. Amid despair, the Kremlin's orders echoed across the front lines. Not one step back. There is no land for us beyond the Volga. Stalingrad had become a symbol of the human spirit, where every brick and every soul fought to the last breath. By September 1942, German forces were forced to abandon their advantage in tanks and artillery, dragged into brutal close-quarters combat and sniper duels amid the debris, a style of warfare at which the Soviets excelled. The battle was no longer a clash of machines, but a raw struggle between men, between the will to live and the certainty of death. On Mamayev Kurgan, the vital hill overlooking the city, so much blood was spilled that the soil turned black. From September 12th to 13th, the 62nd Army was left with only 90 tanks, 650 mortars and artillery pieces, and 20,000 men. The elite 13th Guards Division was ordered to retake Mamayev Hill and the central train station. But in just the first 24 hours, over 80% of their troops were killed. Of the 10,000 men who began the assault, only 320 survived. Train station number 1 changed hands 14 times in just 6 hours, until both sides were too exhausted to fight, leaving thousands of corpses scattered amid the ruins. In the face of this desperate resistance, the Germans brought heavy artillery into the city, including the massive Dora gun, an 800mm railway cannon, designed to flatten anything in its path. But German forces never crossed the Volga, allowing the Soviets to position their artillery on the eastern bank, unleashing devastating counter barrages on German-held positions. At this point, Stalingrad was no longer just a city. It had become a symbol of pride for both Stalin and Hitler. From Moscow, the Stavka, Soviet High Command, deployed every strategic reserve unit to Stalingrad, along with thousands of aircraft that gathered along the Volga. The Germans responded with hellish air raids. On October 14 alone, Luftwaffe launched 2,000 sorties, dropping 600 tons of bombs on the 3 major factories in the city's north. The Red Army's supply routes across the Volga were severed, and the 62nd Army was squeezed into a defensive strip less than 1 kilometer wide along the river's west bank. More than 1,500 bombs fell on that area in a single day, reducing it to smoldering ash. And yet, amid this inferno, Soviet soldiers stood their ground, defending every inch of the Volga's shore. Stalingrad had become a massive grave, swallowing Hitler's ambitions whole. Although the Luftwaffe still ruled the skies over Stalingrad, by mid-November 1942, the tide was turning. A significant portion of the German Air Force had been redeployed to North Africa, leaving the Southern Front vulnerable. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union received massive aid from the United States via the Lend-Lease program. 60,000 trucks, 11,000 jeeps, 2 million pairs of boots, and hundreds of thousands of tons of steel, fuel, and explosives. Reinforced and aided by the brutal Russian winter, the Volga River froze, linking 2 previously separated Soviet fronts. From there, the Red Army launched a fierce counteroffensive targeting the Red October Barricadi and Felix Dzerzhinsky factories. Each workshop, each steel wall, became a symbol of unyielding determination. Though the Germans counterattacked ferociously, the Siberian winds extinguished every flame of hope. Within just a few months, 600,000 German soldiers and 1,000 tanks were destroyed. Germany's finest divisions were bogged down in snow and blood. The Red Army gradually regained control, turning Stalingrad from a bleeding wound into a death trap. On both flanks of the front, the Germans had delegated defensive lines to their allies, the Italians, Hungarians, and Romanians, poorly equipped and low in morale. In some sectors, just 50 men were expected to hold trenches stretching 2 kilometers, while the Red Army still maintained a foothold on the western bank of the Volga, ready to strike. Despite repeated warning from senior generals about the risk of broken flanks, Hitler remained blind, convinced that once Stalingrad was taken, the war would be over. When Chief of Staff Franz Halder voiced opposition, Hitler immediately dismissed him, and from that moment onward, Germany's disaster was sealed. On the far side of the Volga, in -40-degree cold, the Red Army was silently massing its forces. Stalin and his generals were preparing for a counterstrike named Operation Uranus, a bold maneuver that would alter the course of World War II. With over 1 million Axis troops concentrated around Stalingrad, Hitler, in his arrogance, committed a fatal mistake. He violated a fundamental rule of strategy. He exposed both flanks, effectively shooting himself in the foot. Many military historians would later call this the greatest blunder of Hitler's military career. Seeing their chance, the Soviet High Command quickly identified the weak points in the German lines. As German troops remained bogged down in the ruins of Stalingrad, the Soviet staff began preparing a decisive blow in total secrecy. In the autumn of 1942, from the steppes north and south of the city, the Red Army amassed a massive force. Rather than striking directly at the elite German divisions, the Soviets focused their assault on the weaker Axis allies, Romania, Hungary, and Italy, reviving the classic pincer strategy. On November 19, 1942, Operation Uranus was launched. 2 giant red pincers slammed shut, trapping Germany's 6th Army inside the city. Hundreds of thousands of German troops were caught in the freezing cold, without supplies, without a way out. In just a few months, Stalingrad became a graveyard for Nazi Germany, marking the most significant turning point of World War II, as strategic momentum shifted decisively in favor of the Soviet Union. The counteroffensive had been prepared in complete secrecy by the Soviet High Command, with a level of precision paid for in the blood of millions of soldiers over more than a year. When the winter of 1942 hit and German forces were exhausted, stretched thin, Moscow gave the order, launch Operation Uranus. On November 19th, Soviet artillery opened fire across a 300-kilometer front. From the southwestern front under General Vatutin, hundreds of thousands of troops, along with 900 tanks and thousands of artillery pieces, stormed the northern flank of Stalingrad, targeting the Romanian Third Army, positioned as the Axis northern shield. Within just one day, the line collapsed completely. Soviet forces broke through 25 to 35 kilometers deep, smashing open the northern corridor. The following day, November 20th, the southern pincer erupted under the command of General Andrei Yeremenko. The 51st, 57th, and 64th Armies struck the Romanian Fourth Army, the weakest segment of the German southern defenses. These units disintegrated rapidly, unable to withstand the Soviet onslaught. Both pincers surged toward Kalik, a key junction 30 kilometers west of Stalingrad. In just 3 days, the 2 Soviet forces met, sealing the encirclement of the entire German 6th Army and part of the 4th Panzer Army. Roughly 330,000 German and Axis soldiers were now trapped in what will be remembered as the Stalingrad Cauldron, one of the most devastating military traps in history. Surrounded on all sides in -40-degree temperatures, German soldiers began to lose hope. They faced severe shortages of food, ammunition, and fuel, while Soviet forces pressed them from every direction. Stalin ordered the creation of 2 concentric defensive rings, an inner ring to squeeze and annihilate the encircled Germans, an outer ring to prevent any German relief effort from breaking through. A ruthless yet effective strategy, so much so that it sent shivers down the spines of the German High Command. In Berlin, generals pleaded with Hitler to allow withdrawal from Stalingrad and establish a new defensive line along the Don River. But Hitler refused, issuing the infamous order to hold every brick. To maintain a fragile hope, Hitler promised to resupply the Sixth Army by air. In reality, however, the daily requirement of 800 tons of supplies was met with less than 120 tons delivered. That amount was nowhere near enough to survive, let alone to continue fighting. Meanwhile, the skies above Stalingrad were completely dominated by the Soviet Air Force. With the encirclement complete, over 300,000 German and Axis troops were now trapped in the brutal Russian winter. No food, no fuel, no relief. Even in the face of catastrophe, Hitler ordered, "No one is to surrender," a command driven more by pride than logic. To save face with the Third Reich, Berlin launched an ambitious airlift operation, deploying bombers and transport planes to drop supplies into the encircled zone. But this was a mad gamble. By then, the Luftwaffe was exhausted, and the Soviet Air Force controlled the skies over Stalingrad. Intense anti-aircraft fire made every flight a suicide mission. Of the hundreds of Ju-52 and E-111 aircraft deployed, more than 490 were shot down, along with nearly 1,000 veteran pilots. Makeshift German airfields like Tatsinskaya were gradually destroyed by Soviet shock offensives. When the final base collapsed, the airlift completely failed, delivering only 90 tons per day, when the army required 800. Inside the pocket, German soldiers began dying from hunger, cold, and disease. Still, Hitler insisted, the Sixth Army will hold out. Reinforcements are coming. He knew that if Stalingrad fell, the entire German southern front, including Army Groups A and B holding the oil fields of the Caucasus, would collapse with it. In a desperate bid, the German High Command held an emergency meeting in Berlin and launched Operation Winter Storm Wintertwitter, a final attempt to break the encirclement and rescue the Sixth Army. Under General Hermann Hoth, Germany mobilized 3 panzer divisions, 2 infantry divisions, and 3 paratrooper divisions, aiming to open a corridor from Kotelnikovo, south of the Don, directly towards Stalingrad. In early December 1942, German armored columns stormed forward. In the first few days, Hoth achieved some minor successes, but modern weapons were no match for the Russian winter. Icy terrain, fuel shortages, and the stubborn resistance of the Red Army slowed the advance. When only 50 kilometers remained to reach the city, Hoth was forced to halt. Relief forces were stuck, and the Sixth Army was now too weakened to attempt a breakout. Some generals begged General Friedrich Paulus to break out, but Hitler flatly refused. No one is to leave Stalingrad. The German army does not retreat. That decision sealed the fate of over 300,000 men. Operation Winter Storm ended in failure, a testament to Hitler's stubbornness and strategic blindness. On December 10, 1942, General Hermann Hoth launched the 4th Panzer Army into action, officially beginning Operation Winter Storm. This was Germany's final effort to relieve the besieged 6th Army under Paulus inside Stalingrad. The spearhead was led by the 57th Panzer Corps, flanked by the 23rd Motorized Division on the right, the 17th Panzer Division on the left, and the 6th Panzer Division held in reserve. On the Soviet side, General Andrei Yeremenko swiftly organized solid defensive lines, launching hit-and-run guerrilla attacks to delay the German advance. For a full week, Soviet divisions blocked every German breakthrough attempt. But on the morning of December 11th, the Germans launched a surprise counterattack. The 23rd Motorized Division made a bold crossing over the Oxyechelok River, capturing 2 key bridges, overcoming one of the last natural obstacles. Now, the distance between the 4th and 6th Armies had shrunk to just 70 kilometers. Hope ignited, but it would be nothing more than a final flicker before the storm. Recognizing the fatal weakness in the German lines, the flanks held by Italian, Romanian, and Hungarian satellite armies, the Soviet General Staff launched Operation Saturn on December 11th. The objective was clear: crush the Axis allies, break through Germany's exposed offenses, and drive straight to Rostov, the last gateway for German forces in southern Russia. The assault began with the 63rd Army, supported by T-34 tanks, breaching the fragile Italian lines. The Ravenna and Kassiri infantry divisions were annihilated in a matter of hours. By December 17th, a full-scale Soviet offensive unfolded across the front. The 21st Army, 5th Tank Army, and 1st Guards Army launched coordinated strikes. The Italian, Romanian, and Hungarian troops collapsed into disarray. General Paolo Tardini, commander of the Italian armored forces, was killed in action. Italy's 8th Army was completely destroyed, creating a massive breach in the German southern flank. The Red Army surged through, threatening Rostov, the critical hub connecting all of Germany's southern forces. Faced with the possibility of losing Rostov, Field Marshal Manstein was forced to withdraw the 6th Panzer Corps, the strongest reserve under Hoth's command, to confront the Soviet advance. Deprived of his main striking force, General Hoth nevertheless pressed onward towards Stalingrad, battling through heavy snowfall, dwindling fuel supplies, and overwhelming Soviet firepower. Brutal clashes erupted near Oksay Bridge and the Kroljakovo rail station, where tanks from both sides collided head-on in freezing terrain. By nightfall, Germany's 128th Motorized Regiment launched a successful counterattack, briefly clearing the way for Hoth to advance several kilometers. But on December 18th, Hitler again refused to authorize Paulus to break out. As Hoth approached within 50 kilometers of the city, the Red Army unleashed dozens of tank divisions, forming a massive steel barrier that brought the relief effort to a halt. For 3 days, December 19th to 21st, both sides locked in savage combat along the railway leading to Stalingrad. The casualties were staggering, but while the Soviets received steady reinforcements of men and tanks, the Germans had no one left to replace their losses. On December 23rd, 1942, amid the frozen steppe, German armored columns advancing along the railway line suddenly encountered 80 Soviet tanks. After 4 hours of fierce battle, the Germans briefly gained the upper hand, but on Christmas night, as they believed the worst had passed, the Red Army launched a surprise counterattack. Caught off guard, the 128th Motorized Regiment was pushed back to the Oksay River, while the mixed regiment on the left flank broke and fled to Rasmarovsky village, where the German forward command post was located. Soviet artillery unleashed a storm of fire. Entire villages and bridges erupted in flames amid the snow. As night fell and the guns fell silent, the Germans assumed the Soviets had retreated. But at dawn on December 24th, 30 Soviet tanks stormed the Sedekov Bridge, wiping out the German engineering unit defending it. Though the road bridge collapsed, the Soviets rebuilt it within a day under heavy fire, then sent 50 tanks across the river, assaulting Razmarsky, eliminating the remaining defenders, and capturing the railway bridge near Kroljakovo. In just one morning, the Red Army seized the entire area, wiping out Germany's 57 Panzer Corps. Operation Winter Storm, the final rescue attempt for the 6th Army, personally commanded by Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, had utterly failed. All hope of saving the 300,000 trapped soldiers in Stalingrad vanished into the frozen wind. Inside the city, German troops, starving and hopeless, were still being told by Nazi propaganda that reinforcements were very close, that the Red Army was retreating. But outside, there was only the sound of wind howling through ruins, and no army was coming. Some officers urged General Paulus to break out and fight his way west. But he refused, not out of fear, but due to his absolute obedience to Hitler's orders. That stubborn loyalty turned Stalingrad into a massive graveyard for German soldiers. From faraway East Prussia, more than 2,000 kilometers in front, Hitler continued to send daily telegrams, issuing commands and morale-boosting messages, as if he could still direct the battlefield from a map. But in truth, Stalingrad was already cut off from the world. The 2 makeshift German airstrips near the city were soon overrun by the Red Army. By early January 1943, only 1 supply flight per day could reach the city, delivering meager rations and medicine at the cost of dozens of aircraft shot down. With temperatures plummeting to minus 40 degrees Celsius, dead bodies froze stiff in the snow, guns jammed with ice, and hunger became the most brutal enemy of all. Sensing the moment had come, the Soviet Union launched Operation Ring. deploying 3 armies to tighten the noose from the west and south. On January 10, 1943, Soviet artillery unleashed a massive bombardment. The earth trembled beneath the thunder of guns. To the west, German armored units were crushed within hours. By the morning of January 11th, the entire first line of German defenses had collapsed. Inside the city, General Paulus clung to what remained, sending desperate messages pleading for permission to withdraw. But Hitler's response was cold and unwavering. No retreat. Stalingrad must be held at all costs. Outside, the Red Army continued to close in like a tightening vice. Inside, the Sixth Army could only wait for the end. In the western sector, Soviet forces made major gains. The 29th Motorized Division and 376th Infantry Division of the Wehrmacht were completely destroyed, and other units were pushed back deeper into the ruins. Temperatures dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius, and the cold killed more soldiers and artillery. After a brief pause, the Soviets launched another fierce assault, advancing toward Gumrak Airfield, the last functioning airstrip of the Sixth Army. When it fell on January 23, 1943, all hopes of resupply or evacuation were gone. Now, the Germans survived only on parachute drops from the skies. On January 24th, the Red Army issued a final ultimatum, but once again, Paulus refused to surrender, obeying Hitler's direct orders. Hitler compared his soldiers to the Spartans at Thermopylae, destined to fight to the last man. But Paulus knew the truth. He and hundreds of thousands of men had been abandoned. Defying his orders, he made the moral decision to surrender, hoping to save the lives that could still be saved. To his soldiers, it was not cowardice. It was an act of humanity in a frozen hell. On January 31st, 1943, General Friedrich Paulus and the Sixth Army officially surrendered. 91,000 German troops, including 24 generals, were taken prisoner. They marched through minus 24 degrees Celsius snow, starving, wounded, and defeated, headed for Soviet POW camps in Siberia. Only a few thousand would ever return home after the war. Upon hearing the news, Hitler flew into a rage, denouncing Paulus and cursing those who chose to live in shame rather than die in glory. He declared, "Had Stalingrad not surrendered, we would have had a new Thermopylae on Russian soil." But history had made its choice. The Battle of Stalingrad ended in a total Soviet victory. The Axis suffered over 1.05 million casualties. The Soviets lost more than 1.5 million men, along with thousands of tanks, guns, and aircraft. In total, 2.5 million lives were engulfed in the steel inferno, making Stalingrad the bloodiest battle in the history of humanity. This victory did not just save the Soviet Union. It transformed the course of World War II. From the ashes of Stalingrad, the Red Army began its long counteroffensive, driving the Nazis ever westward, until Berlin itself fell 2 years later.